While millions of people are yelling at their televisions, wearing team colors, and feeling crushed because 11 strangers lost a game, there is a huge group of people who feel absolutely nothing about it. And according to neuroscience, their brains may actually work in a different way. Stay with me because what I am about to share might completely change how you look at the sports lovers in your life. Here is something people rarely say out loud. Not caring about sports does not make you dull. It does not mean you lack enthusiasm, and it certainly does not mean there is something wrong with you. But there is something interesting happening in your brain that sets you apart from the roughly 60% of Americans who follow sports with deep loyalty. Let us start with the obvious question. Why do so many people care so intensely? Humans are wired for tribes. For thousands of years, belonging to a group was the key to staying alive. Your tribe protected you, helped you find food, and gave you safety. In sports today, they are basically modern tribes, just with jerseys, logos, and better advertising. When someone watches their favorite team, their brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It is the same chemical that strengthens family connections. Strange, right? Their brain is essentially convinced that these wealthy athletes are part of their inner circle. But here is where things shift. People who are not drawn to sports obsession often have what psychologists describe as weaker tribal instincts. Their sense of identity is not tightly wrapped around group membership. They tend to be more independent. They are more likely to think, I do not need to belong to a larger group to feel whole. And this idea is backed by research. A study from 2019 found that people with little interest in sports showed much less us versus them thinking. In simple terms, they do not automatically dislike the other team just because it is not theirs. But it gets even more surprising, because what happens inside the brain of a devoted sports fan during a game can be intense. You know that feeling right before opening a gift? That buzz of anticipation? That is dopamine firing. Sports fans experience that same chemical rush during games. Every play, every moment. Small, repeated hits of anticipation and reward. It can become addictive. Brain scans using functional magnetic resonance imaging show that watching a favorite team activates the same reward centers linked to gambling and other highly stimulating behaviors. And here is the key part. The uncertainty is what keeps it going. Not knowing whether the team will win keeps dopamine levels cycling. This is called intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward pattern known in psychology. It is the same system that makes slot machines so hard to walk away from. The process closely mirrors other forms of behavioral addiction. Your brain does not really care where dopamine comes from. It only knows it wants more. People who feel indifferent toward sports simply do not get that chemical response from watching competition they are not part of. And there is evidence this could be genetic. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that differences in dopamine receptor genes may influence how strongly someone is drawn to competitive spectator activities. Let that sink in. Your lack of interest in whether the Lakers win or lose might actually be written into your biology. But there is another layer to this. Sports fans often experience something called basking in reflected glory. When their team wins, they say, "We won." When the team loses, they say, "They lost." Notice how the language changes? People who do not fixate on sports are far less likely to create that emotional distance. They usually have a more steady sense of who they are. They do not rely on outside wins to feel accomplished. Their confidence stays more even and is less tied to outcomes they cannot control. Before anyone gets upset, let me be clear. I am not saying one approach is better than the other. I am saying the psychological differences are real, and they are genuinely interesting to understand. And here is where it sounds a little surprising. People who love sports often score higher on certain measures of empathy. They regularly practice caring deeply about the struggles and victories of others, even when those people are complete strangers wearing a team uniform. So why does that same empathy not always show up for athletes among people who do not care about sports. It comes down to how empathy is distributed. Everyone has a limited amount of emotional energy. People who are not into sports tend to invest that energy in different areas: social causes, close relationships, creative work, intellectual challenges. A study from 2021 found that people with low interest in sports scored much higher in openness to experience and appreciation for art and beauty. They still seek emotional intensity, meaning, connection, and a sense of transcendence. Their brains are chasing the same rewards. They are just finding them through art, music, nature, ideas, and exploration instead of competition. And there is another honest layer to this. For some people, not caring about sports can act as a form of protection. Maybe they were teased or excluded in physical education classes. Maybe sports culture never felt welcoming. Maybe they resist the aggressive competitiveness that often surrounds fandom. Or maybe they simply never understood why adults shout at screens over a game. Your lack of interest may come with a story, or it may simply come down to preference. Both explanations are completely valid. Now here is the part that explains why sports fans and non-fans often struggle to understand each other. It comes down to how meaning is experienced. Sports fans often find meaning through narrative: the underdog rise, the comeback, the dynasty, the rivalry. It works because it is unpredictable, emotional, and filled with real stakes. People who do not care about sports often see that randomness as empty. They wonder why they should invest emotionally in an outcome they cannot influence, played by people they do not know, in a game that does not affect their real life. They are not wrong. But sports fans are not wrong either. These are simply two different ways of meeting the human need for story and significance. One group finds epic meaning in a championship run. The other finds it in a novel, a relationship, a creative pursuit, or a scientific breakthrough. Researchers describe this difference as parasocial investment versus direct engagement. Sports fans form one-sided emotional bonds with teams and players. People who are not into sports prefer putting emotional energy where there is real interaction, where their care affects the outcome, where they are involved rather than watching from the sidelines. Neither approach is superior. They are simply different strategies for moving through life. Psychologist Mihaly, who studied optimal experience, found that flow states, those moments of complete immersion, can come from countless activities. For some people, that state comes from watching sports. For others, it comes from almost anything else. And here is something especially interesting. People who do not obsess over sports often say they feel more present in their own lives. They are not spending hours each week emotionally invested in someone else's struggle. They are focused on their own challenges and growth. There is something quietly powerful about that. So what does all of this really mean? If you do not care about sports, you are not missing some essential part of being human. You are simply wired differently. Your reward system, your sense of belonging, and your emotional focus are calibrated in another way. And that is completely okay. The next time someone asks if you watched the game and you truly could not care less, remember this: you are not broken. You are not boring. You are just playing a different game, one that might actually matter more to you.